Hello. I'd like to talk about one of my favorite topics, and that's the one related to metrics, specifically metrics that are innovation oriented. And I'm going to review a presentation I did a while back. I'm going to start with um, how we typically look at measures. So here's an example. I work in the Career Center here at Seton Hall, but you probably do something very similar in your worlds as well, where um, higher organizations or senior leadership has their priorities that drives the mission of the organization, and then smaller departments do as well. So if you look at the examples I have here for our university, you'll see something like significantly increased student success rates, or explore feasibility of expanding experiential learning opportunities. And then when you get down to your specific department, you might say, well, how do I do that? How do I make an impact on that? And so really, it's not that. So if you look at the Career Center here, it says create the most prepared students. What action can I take right now in order to pull that off, right? Another thing to say would be there's 10 people on this listening to my voice right now. What does that metric mean? In the grand context of these university priorities or the career center's goals, so we have 10 people sitting in a room. Does that mean something? What action can we take as a result of that? And it's not always very clear. So, what do we typically do in this example is to try to align things. So here's an example of an aligning document that starts with, all the way on the left-hand side, the university goal and context, and all the way on the right-hand side, what is it that specific department does that would allow them to make an impact on their own departmental goals. So what do they measure? So, but take everything that you actually measure in your department and just list it. Alignment would mean, what is it that we measure that meets our goals that's also in alignment with a specific goal that's related to the university at large? So that's a way of sort of connecting the dots between people at the highest levels of the organization and people at the quote unquote lowest levels in the organization. What I'm describing here is something called a hierarchy, or a measurement hierarchy, where goals are, from the highest levels to the lowest levels, need to be sort of in alignment from a strategy perspective and from a measurement perspective. So organizations have high level strategic goals and key indicators. They have operational metrics. They have fundamental day to day metrics. And I'm going to work you through a quick example. So let's look at um, retail. So let's look at two retail organizations that might be, let's go with Walmart, and let's go with Bloomingdale's. So, from a strategic goal perspective or a key indicator perspective, my guess is both of those organizations would have profitability goals, key indicators that would be outcomes related to those profitability goals might be sales. Um, so that's sort of obvious for the both of them. Down below, operational metrics might be things like customer service, customer traction, number of people in the store at any one time, peaks and valleys, those kinds of things. Somewhere in the middle is a way to connect that. So, what do we want customers to know? So, fundamental content. This is the person who needs to take an action. What do they need to know? Well, they probably need to know the mission or the value proposition or the reason that they're going to either Walmart or Bloomingdale's. So, do they understand the brand of the respective companies? If we go up to the top of this triangle in terms of key indicators, So in order to make a sale, which would be a key indicator or an outcome, what behavior needs to occur in order for that key indicator to happen, for a sale to be made? And in this case, you would say that, well, the customer needs to make a decision to buy something. A buying decision is what leads to a sale. So, fundamental content is, do they understand what the brand is, or what's the reason why this is the store they want to be in? The behavior that we want within the organization is for them to make a buy decision. Now, between those two is something called a driver. What drives people to act? In this case, what is the driver of sales at a Walmart? One might argue the driver would be price. People go to Walmart because they'll get better deals. So that's something which I think we would all agree. But is that the driver at Bloomingdale's? It may not be. At Bloomingdale's, it could be completely different. It could be status, or it could be the different brand names that they offer. It could be style. It could be a lot of things. It's certainly not always going to be price. So in terms of these two organizations in their industry, many of their measurements are the same, but the drivers of their profitability, the drivers of their customer behavior are not the same. In our own department here in the Career Center, you can see, we have very similar approach. So at the very top, we want to be ranked well, in these national polls. We want to make sure that our students get good placements when they graduate college, that they land in good companies with good salaries. We also know that we have our operational metrics, their satisfaction with their use of our services. In terms of fundamental content, do they know how to write a resume? Do they know how to interview? Do they know how to network? Those are things that we would want them to be good at. Now, what is the behavior and the competency that we expect in order to be hired? A student needs to demonstrate application behavior. They need to put themselves in position to be hired by applying, as well as having the fundamental content that they would learn through our services. What is the driver of application behavior? What we have found is students are more motivated to apply for positions if the systems that house positions have available opportunities that are of interest to them. Right? So that's our action. Can we find employers and opportunities where students would be excited about applying and then putting themselves in the situation where they can actually be interviewed? So there's a simple example of how a department, which is not bottom line-ish the way a sales group would be, but it certainly demonstrates this concept of measurement hierarchy. All right? Now, metrics are so critical when it comes to change. So they can be very helpful. So they can signal your strategic intent. In fact, when a strategic plan is written, a metric strategy really needs to be in place along with your strategic plans. These need to be parallel activities where you know how you're going to measure your change ideas or your new strategies. And you want to be able to kind of make sure you're hitting all the top strategic priorities. So are your measurements, focused on your key stakeholders, measuring their needs and desires? Can you look at things from a improving process perspective or a cost perspective in terms of alignment of resources or a culture within your organization? Are you choosing the highest level elements in your performance system so that you're giving folks feedback on the things that actually will make a difference? And sometimes those can be confused when you get down to things like measuring behavior. Those could be somewhat complex. So you need to find ways to have simple measurement approaches. And maybe your organization has that level of sophistication to do that. Maybe it doesn't, but it's certainly critical because at the end of it all, behavior change is certainly what we're looking for in terms of are people doing the right things to bring about the change. In this regard, measurement has two sides to it. It's got the performance side, which means are we doing the right things from a stakeholder perspective? Are we looking at things from a process perspective? Or do we have access to the right resources? And are we getting the best from our resources, which could be related to your organizational culture? The other side of it is time. Different measures fall from a timeline perspective in different places. So, for example, there are lagging indicators that report what we did already, what happened yesterday. There are measures about what's happening right now, real time. There are measures about what we expect to happen in the future, so predictors, if you will, leading indicators, and those are very valuable. And then there are ones that can sort of teach us as well as leading us. They can teach us about what we can do, what we can expect in the longer term. Those would be called learning indicators. If I were to go to that very first alignment document that I did early on, you'll see you can actually take all of those measures and line them up against this 4x4 matrix. So you'll see the columns here. We have stakeholder, process, resource, and culture. And that's the rows. And in the columns, you can have lagging, real-time, leading, and learning. So very interesting, I find, is that stakeholder strategies tend to be lagging indicators. Things like financials, or things that would be like a sales actually could be real time. But in our world here, things like employment rates for last year's graduating class, that's not something we can affect anymore. It's something that is what it is. It's part of history. In terms of leading indicators, using the Career Center example, you could actually use student skill level in their ability to write resumes and interviews and network. You could actually argue that those are leading indicators, because the better those are, the more likely it is they will be able to apply for positions and get considered. Certainly application behavior could be considered a leading indicator. And as I gave in our example before, you could actually use the available positions of interest as a learning indicator. Why aren't they applying? And it's because they don't see anything of interest to them. That could be the reason. So that's a good opportunity to dive deeply into, what is it that a student would motivate a student. We do assessments, which are ways of kind of getting under the hood with what students view as positive and negative. We try to get reflections from their intern experiences, and this is the same thing a company would do with their customers. Why is it that a customer makes a buy decision or spends the amount that they do, etc. So I thought you would find that interesting in terms of metrics. And again, if you're going to ask for behavior change, as you consider your change management plans and what have you, it's good to understand what are you actually measuring and what's behind the measure that actually can be a signal of behavior. So this obviously is something that it's very small writing, and I get that. But whatever measures that you pick should go into your performance system. When you're writing your goals, you should be incorporating those so that people can get feedback around, how they're doing in relationship to their goals and the goals of the organization, as it is in regards to the change that people are expecting.